Hello, and welcome to the ASU Environmental Health and Safety Service Provider Orientation. The purpose of this orientation is to provide basic information about service provider responsibilities, ASU's emergency reporting process, hazards that may be present at ASU locations, and other safety reminders. Throughout the presentation, the phrase service provider means service providers and their employees, as well as subcontractors and their employees. The presentation is designed for ASU service providers who conduct their work at an ASU location and may use or interact with hazardous materials or processes during their work. This includes construction and renovation contractors, trades, custodial and maintenance contractors, and other similar service providers. This is not intended for service providers who conduct work primarily from a remote location or work only in an office setting. This orientation provides basic expectations for ASU service providers and is not a substitute for the required federal, state, or local environmental health and safety regulations. In addition, this orientation does not cover all potential hazards. Each service provider is responsible for identifying potential hazards associated with the scope of work, reducing or eliminating potential hazards, and providing their staff with necessary training and equipment. Let's jump in. Service provider expectations are to comply with federal, state, and local environmental health and safety regulations and follow best practices, cooperate with inspectors, ensure proper identification of employees, evaluate and inform employees of job hazards, inform staff about the scope of work and boundaries of their work area, instruct staff about parking on campus, provide and maintain appropriate tools and equipment for the job, provide staff with personal protective equipment, require staff to behave professionally, review emergency procedures, evacuation routes, and assembly points with staff. Smoking is prohibited at ASU, including vaping, and train staff to work safely and according to environmental regulations. In the event of an emergency, immediately call 911 for assistance. Then notify your site contact or project manager as soon as possible. If the emergency involves an employee fatality or hospitalization, or it requires assistance from the local fire department, we ask that you notify the Environmental Health and Safety Department. Fire department response may include a fire, chemical, gas, or other hazardous material release. ASU requests an incident investigation report from the service provider. We like to receive the report within 2 days. Please review emergency procedures when beginning work at an ASU location. ASU's Emergency Response Guide gives some basic emergency instructions and are available upon request. ASU has processes in place to ensure the proper planning and operation of contracted work. Appropriate ASU permits are required before proceeding with work, including asbestos, lead, and other hazardous demolition materials, building permits, confined space entry, demolition, dust control, hot work, and utility shutdown. Your ASU project manager will assist you with submitting the required paperwork. Permits must be obtained before the work begins, so please allow sufficient lead time. Finally, please follow all permit conditions. Many types of activities require barricades to keep our campus community safe from hazards. Barricades require approval from the ASU Police Department, ASU Parking and Transit Services, and the ASU Environmental Health and Safety Department, including fire safety and prevention. Your project manager or site contact will assist with obtaining approvals before putting up any barricades on ASU property. If your work requires a crane, please complete a crane rigging lift and landing plan form and submit it to the email provided. Service providers are responsible for safely operating cranes. This includes ensuring that operators are properly trained and qualified to operate the equipment. Each service provider whose work involves confined space entry must develop, implement, and maintain their own confined space entry program, including all required elements. The service provider must ensure their staff follow all confined space entry procedures. A confined space entry permit, hazard review, proper equipment, and training are all required prior to entry into a confined space. These should include entry equipment such as body harnesses, calibrated monitoring equipment, communication systems, lockout devices, personal protective equipment, and ventilation design. Service providers are responsible for electrical safety while working on campus. All electrical work shall be completed by a qualified person familiar with code requirements and the class of work to be performed. Energized parts and equipment must be guarded to protect people and objects from harm or damage. The proper tools and cords for the job should be used. Arrange cords to avoid damage and create a trip hazard. Lockout-tagout must be utilized to prevent accidental startup. Service providers are responsible to prevent illness from extreme heat. Prevention includes allowing workers to gradually increase their workload in extreme heat and take frequent breaks until they acclimate to the heat. Monitoring staff for signs of illness. Monitoring weather conditions and adjusting work or break schedules accordingly. Providing workers with water, shade, and access to a cool location. Planning for emergencies. And training workers on preventing and responding to heat stress and illness. For elevator safety, do not allow students or the public in the elevator if moving materials and equipment. Exercise caution when operating freight elevators. Follow operating signage. Immediately follow reporting procedures, warn others, and notify Facilities Development and Management at 480-965-3633 if there is an elevator injury or malfunction. Use a freight elevator when moving material and equipment if possible, and watch for and immediately report any potential issues or concerns with any elevators on campus. Call 480-965-3633 for assistance with staging an elevator, removing or dislodging ceiling tiles, and verifying load rating of platforms. Falls are a major cause of workplace injuries and deaths. Fall protection systems are required for floor openings, ladders, protection against falling objects, roof access, scaffolding, use of a bucket or scissor lift, working above hazardous machinery or equipment, and working with any other task with recognized fall hazards. The service provider is responsible for assessing fall hazards, taking steps to remove hazards, and training staff. Certain jobs, especially in construction, have particularly high hazards. These include high-pressure equipment or working near power lines. Written notification must be provided to the project manager and EHS if high-pressure water cleaning blasting equipment in excess of 5,000 pounds per square inch is to be used. Email notification is acceptable. Always operate high-hazard equipment and processes according to the manufacturer's written instructions and best practices. In order to ensure fire safety, please keep the following housekeeping in mind. All construction materials are to be stored in an orderly manner. Clean up all spills, including oil, solvents, fuels, etc. Game boxes are to be removed immediately from mechanical workspaces upon completion of projects. Hot work permits are required for activities such as welding, cutting, brazing, etc. Follow permit requirements. Keep all exits and access ways unobstructed. Remove all scrap and trash from the job site daily, and store fuels, chemicals, and waste in appropriate containers. ASU asks that each service provider follow hazard communication requirements and best practices. This includes informing staff of potential hazards associated with their work, container labeling, and keeping safety data sheets for each hazardous substance. If your work involves dust, fumes, or odor-producing activities, you'll need to plan ahead to avoid impacting building occupants. Work with your project manager or site contact to be sure approvals and notifications are completed before work starts. Also, in some cases, smoke detectors or building air intakes will need to be isolated to prevent disruption inside buildings. The service provider is responsible for assessing their employees' exposure to airborne contaminants and taking appropriate prevention measures. Please follow all traffic safety regulations and mall vehicle load limits while on campus to prevent accidents. Be aware of the areas where equipment is offloaded. Stay in designated areas and avoid high-traffic locations. Observe all site traffic regulations, speed limits, traffic signs, and ASU mall vehicle load limits. Park in specified areas only. Pedestrians have the right of way at all times. A flag person must be present in congested areas. The authorized operator shall shut off the motor and set the brakes before leaving the vehicle controls. The driver is responsible for safety of passengers and stability of the materials being hauled or handled by their equipment. Federal safety regulations apply to the control of hazardous energy, or lockout-tagout. These regulations address practices and procedures needed to disable machinery or equipment to prevent release of hazardous energy, such as electric energy. All service providers working on equipment must affix their own lock and tag. The lock must be a different color from ASU locks. Notify the ASU project manager to inform them that a particular piece of equipment or system is being shut down, locked, and tagged out for work areas not specifically under the exclusive control of the service provider. Personal safety locks may not be removed without approval from ASU Facilities Development and Management and the service provider's responsible manager when ASU staff and contractors are working in the same location. The lock must be removed with the approval of the originator when the work is complete. Service providers must maintain a written program to identify and control sources of hazardous energy, such as electrical panels. The program must be equivalent to ASU's program. All service providers are responsible for assessing hazards for the work, eliminating those hazards where possible, and determining personal protective equipment to protect employees from hazards. PPE may include eye and face protection, gloves, hearing protection, protective clothing, and respiratory protection. Hazardous materials can be found anywhere on campus, including the areas listed below. Hazards may be anywhere on campus. ASU provides signage to alert campus personnel of recognized risks. Examples of known hazards on campus: biohazards, chemicals, lasers, and radiation. Biohazards are microorganisms, microbial toxins, and other biological agents that can infect and cause disease in humans. Examples of biohazards include bacteria, fungi, human blood or other bodily fluids, parasites, tissues and human cell lines, viruses, and wildlife and insects. Biohazards are often referred to as infectious agents or etiological agents. Hazardous chemicals and gases may be located in any laboratory, outdoor area, swimming pool equipment area, IT server areas, chemical and waste storage areas. Chemicals such as solvents, oxidizers, and corrosives may be present in laboratories or chemical storage. Bulk nitrogen tanks and gaseous ammonia tanks are two examples of hazardous gases that may be present on campus. Lasers are used in many laboratories on campus. Lasers can cause serious damage to eyes, skin, and mucous membranes. Never enter a room when the laser in use light is on. Some laboratories at ASU locations use radioactive materials. These areas are marked with the symbols shown on the slide. Any entry into these areas requires approval and specialized training. Whenever possible, avoid entering an area where radioactive materials are used. Do not enter radiation areas unless you are specifically authorized to enter as part of the scope of work. ASU spends millions of dollars each year on research. It is important not to disturb research activities. Do not disturb laboratory papers, including papers left on the floor. Do not handle hazardous materials or waste unless specifically authorized. Hazardous wastes are stored in labeled containers. Never move or touch items on lab benches. ASU has removed asbestos, lead-based paint, and other hazardous materials from many locations. However, these items still remain in some older buildings. The service provider is responsible for special handling and personal protective equipment when work involves disturbing or handling hazardous building materials. Work closely with your ASU site contact or project manager to identify site-specific hazards such as asbestos or lead. Special procedures apply to evacuation at the ASU Polytechnic campus and to work inside the Tempe campus tunnel system. These locations require special precautions due to historic lead and asbestos. ASU EHS is available to assist with identifying hazardous materials at the worksite. An asbestos demolition notification is required to be submitted to the regulatory agency when any load-supporting structure or building member is removed or modified, even if asbestos is not present. An asbestos renovation notification is required when regulated asbestos-containing material is disturbed. Your project manager will work with ASU's asbestos program manager to identify locations containing these materials. The service provider is responsible for posting fully informative and legible warning signs and markings on barricade stands, posts, or other suitable stanchions before work starts. The signs must be removed promptly after the work is done. The project manager or site contact will work with EHS to properly dispose of demolition waste, such as fluorescent bulbs, batteries, and laboratory chemicals. The service provider is responsible for disposal of all waste materials they bring on site to complete their work. This includes leftover paint, paint thinner, adhesive, used batteries, oil, and other wastes. ASU implements an extensive stormwater pollution prevention plan, or SWPPP. Before starting any construction disturbance activity, please develop an SWPPP and submit a notice of intent to the appropriate regulatory agency. Implement best management practices outlined in the plan. File notice of termination with the regulatory agency within 30 days once the project is complete. No waste or debris may be placed in stormwater systems or drains. Collect and properly dispose of waste and construction debris. Provide a copy of the authorization certificate, notice of intent, and the SWPPP to the ASU Capital Programs Management Group and maintain required compliance documentation at the site. Your ASU project manager will assist with stormwater requirements. Work sites in Maricopa County that involve disturbing 1/10 of an acre or more require a dust control permit. When determining the disturbed acreage, you must include unpaved parking areas, roads, and material handling areas. Construction sites should monitor track-out situations to prevent materials from leaving the site. The service provider is responsible for contacting the Maricopa County Air Quality Department at 602-372-1467 to obtain the permit. Disturbed areas are required to be stabilized with water to prevent dust generation, even if a permit is not required. And monitor your speed and drive below 15 miles per hour. ASU takes environmental health and safety compliance very seriously. If a potential environmental health and safety violation is found, we will take steps to remedy the situation. This may include a verbal or written warning. More serious or repeated violations may result in the service provider or subcontractor being removed from the project or scope of work. Very serious violations or disregard for community safety may prohibit the service provider or subcontractor from participating in future contracted work. We know that our service provider partners take these issues seriously and will assist in our efforts to keep our community healthy and safe. This is the end of the presentation. Thank you for attending. Remember, this orientation is not a substitute for environmental health and safety training required by federal, state, or local regulations. In addition, this orientation does not cover all potential hazards. Please work with your ASU contact to identify potential hazards that may be associated with your assigned tasks. Use the web link below or scan the QR code to enter your information to receive credit for this course. If you have any additional questions or comments, please contact the ASU Environmental Health and Safety Department using the contact information in this slide.